and welcome to episode 4 of the Planning Period podcast. I'm your host, Brad Schreffler. I have to start this episode this week with an apology. I had some microphone hiccups when I recorded this episode, and so my audio is not great. I went back and I re-recorded as much as I could and did as much editing and digital trickery as I could manage, but my audio when I speak is really not great at some points. However, the conversations I had with Nicole Mutters, my guest this week, I thought were worth getting through the audio. We had some of the most instructionally driven conversations that have been had on this podcast so far. We talked about a lot of really cool stuff, including student-centered learning, standards mastery, grading practices, and others. So I thought that despite the audio hiccups, it was worth putting this episode together and putting it out there for you. Nicole Mutters is a really good friend of mine. We've known each other for a couple years, and she is now an assistant principal in our district. So she's also my first guest that is an administrator. And I thought she would make an awesome guest for my podcast, and she did not disappoint. So sit back and enjoy my interview with Nicole Mutters. All right, I am joined today by a very good friend of mine, Miss Nicole Mutters. And I'm going to let you get us started off by telling us a little bit about you.
I have been working in the education environment for about 12 years in some way, shape, or form. I was not an education major, but decided my last year of college to go into education and have been working in schools ever since. I started out in a middle school for 2 years, moved into a high school for 6 years, and I'm now back at a middle school as an assistant principal.
So I wanted to have you on for a few reasons. Number one, you're obviously a good friend of mine. We've known each other and been friends for the last couple of years that we worked at the school I'm still at, and you totally abandoned me from. But also, you have recently transitioned into the administrator role.
Correct. I was in an instructional support position for almost 2 years, and I just moved into the assistant principal role the beginning of December.
So 5 months, give or take 6 months, I guess, right?
Right at it, yes.
I know I've said this before, but congratulations.
Thank you.
It's funny because this is episode 4 of my show. And a couple weeks ago, I interviewed Kristin Iannuzzi, who you also know, you know as well. And we spent a lot of that episode with talking about her being in her master's program and if she was even glad she was doing it. And I don't know how many conversations you've had with her about it, but she struggles with if she even wants to finish the program, let alone what she potentially wants to do with it afterwards. So it's kind of cool that I get a chance to talk to you about that now that you've done that and have made that transition into administrator.
Yeah, I have talked to her a couple of times, and the biggest thing that I continue to remind her is that just because you get that master's degree doesn't mean that you have to go into an assistant principal or principal role. There's many different positions that you can go into, whether it is at the district level or teaching at the university level. My master's program, I was in a small cohort of 12, and out of those 12, only 2 of us actually went into administration at the school level. So once you kind of figure out through those programs and those classes, you can decide exactly where you want to take that master's. And I've kind of talked her through that, I think, a little bit. Overall, it's,
And that was kind of the impression she gave on the podcast, too, was very much like, I'm doing it because it seems like a good choice, but,
Right.
But yeah, so let's move into my first question and just kind of flow off of there, see where we end up. And my first question, as it always is what is currently the biggest problem facing education?
From my experience being at the high school level and middle school in the last 6 to 7 years in the transition, I think the biggest problem that I've experienced is pushing students forward too quickly. They're expected to be taking college level courses in high school and not just 1 or 2. It's expected now that you're taking a good 4 or 5 by your senior year load, or you're in a CTE program, which is technical education. And I've seen it in the high school level where it really stressed out the students because so much pressure is put on them that I don't think we had when we were in high school. We did take AP classes. We did take dual enrollment. They did want us to take them, but it wasn't such a pressure that you had this expectation that if you don't, then you're not going to succeed in these areas. And now that I've moved to middle school, I see it even more. I see 7th and 8th graders taking 2 and 3 high school level courses before they're ever even in high school, and they struggle with the material there, and then they get to high school and they struggle, and yet we keep pushing them faster and faster.
So Mutters came over today because our district is changing our websites over, and she needed some help with some of that kind of stuff. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that, you're going to record for my podcast with me. And one of the things we talked about while we were looking at website stuff was a story that came up with me where one of my students asked me if I had senioritis when I was in school. And I'll tell the story because I think it's kind of funny. My student asked me, he said, hey, Mr. Shreffler, did you have senioritis when you were in school? And I said, no, I really didn't. I said, part of the reason for that is, and as I've said on here, is I wanted to be in music ed, and we were on a 4x4 block, so I only had 4 classes a day, and we're able to do an entire year in a semester for credit. And I said, one of the advantages for me is I got to spend literally half my day by the time I was a senior in a band room with a trumpet on my face, and that was exactly what I wanted to do. And any rigorous college level courses I took were only because I liked them. I took AP Bio because I liked the biology teacher, and I took AP Lit because I love English, and I took AP Psych because I really enjoyed psychology. That one kind of backfired because they changed the teacher between taking Psych 2 and taking AP Psych, and it did not work as well. But that's a story for another day. It still ended up being great, though, because I had friends in that course, and we got along great. It was awesome. So I said, no, I really didn't have senioritis. But I said, I totally get where you guys get it.
Right.
Because what you guys deal with now is so completely different than what I had when I was in school. And then I further said that I have senioritis now. In the end of this school year, I'm ready for that to be over. But that was a little bit different. So do you think there are benefits to the system the way it is? Or do you think that the whole thing, in terms of acceleration and taking higher level courses, do you think that the whole thing needs to be either completely revamped or tossed out? Or
I think that the expectation in the course road pathway that is offered isn't a bad one. I think the problem is that we push students who don't have that level or don't have that expectation to be in them. Not every child is going to go to college and get a master's. Not every child is going to go and get a technical degree and move on. There are students who are just not going to do that, and yet we basically have created a system that doesn't allow for that anymore. You don't have an opportunity to take classes that you're actually going to succeed in because they might be regular or honors and get a high school diploma. We are constantly pushing, basically the expectation is that every child takes at least one AP course every year now. And I think that is something that is not realistic. As ninth graders, their brains, their attitudes, everything about them is not built for college because that's why it's college. So the minute we start pushing that on them, they're basically, in all senses of reality, losing their childhood. And now it's pushing back even into the middle school level where they're taking high school level courses. So I don't think it needs to be something that we totally revamp the entire system. I think that it's a great opportunity to create pathways and let students take those pathways. And if it's not the highest level and they choose to still go to college and get a master's, they can still do that. But for the students who aren't at that level, they aren't forced into something that they're not ready for.
I can get that. I got that. Let me come at this in a different way. If you had a child going into 6th grade right now, and you are in the current system, you have everything we have to work with, your kid's going into 6th grade, thinking forward from 6th to 12th grade, what would that student's course load look like for you if it were your child? Knowing that as a parent, you can advocate, and no matter what the school says, you ultimately can decide, which is the reality now.
Right.
Most parents wouldn't argue with the school, I would say. But, and certainly, I shouldn't say most parents wouldn't argue with school. We all know that's not true, but maybe not to that level. But what would that pathway look like for you?
I think being where I'm at, I would let the child choose their own electives, first of all, which we sometimes don't do because we need to place them in places that they look better or that their score is going to be better. But I would let them choose their electives. I think 6th and 7th grade, there should just be a basic expectation of learning the foundations, whether that is just mathematics for 7th grade or whether that is in a reading class because my child needs additional assistance in reading. Either way, it's what that child needs in 6th and 7th. I think once you get to 8th grade, you can decide if a student can make me take an accelerated course if it's a class that they're good in. And so if it was, say, my child and I knew that they excelled in math, letting them take that high school level algebra 1 in 8th grade is acceptable. But at the same time, if they're not doing well in it, then 9th grade year, they're going to take it again. I think that students do need to be pushed, but I will say, just like my parents did with us, myself, I'm the oldest child, and I excelled by being pushed to do things. And my parents knew that about me. So AP was fairly new, and I took 2 my junior year and 2 my senior year. My sister did everything she could to stay on top of the work she was already given in honors classes. So that is not a child, mine or any other, that I think needs to be totally pushed into AP or anything like that. So I think it's an individual child basis, which is where our area schools and the state has made this new push, which has really taken away that individualization, and they create these formulas where they expect these students to perform just based on a number or a series of numbers that they think makes the perfect formula, which in reality, it's all about the grit and what they're going to force themselves to do as a child. If I really, really like math, even though I'm not great at it, I'm going to work harder to do it. And not every child's like that. And I think each child has different interests, which makes them better or worse at any subject.
All right, I can see that. I think I might even go a step further than you in that I would allow my son, Zach, right now, I don't think I would allow my son to take a high school level course in middle school. I also don't genuinely believe that would hurt his career or future in any way. I don't believe that colleges put the weight on these things that we think they do. So even if the kid is going to college, I don't think I am going to kill him or kill his college potential by saying, nah, you can take algebra as a freshman, and you can take it side by side with honors English or whatever. And I taught middle school before I taught high school, and I was shocked to hear from my former 7th graders who were getting ready for college or high school saying, I'm taking this AP course and this AP course. As a freshman?
Absolutely.
That's ridiculous. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. And we practically force every freshman into AP if they're not what we consider done.
Right.
I mean, and I hate to say that bluntly, but that's really where we're at.
Well, and I think that's my biggest possibly fault as an administrator is I don't see numbers. Like I see a child standing in front of me who is, and that's where I guess for me, I wouldn't necessarily say I wouldn't allow them to, because I do see students that need to be challenged much more than they are. And if that means they take a high school level course in 8th grade, even if they don't do well in it, it gives them something to look forward to and work hard at. Whereas the opportunity to then take it again in 9th grade if necessary should be there. And I don't think that's where we're not following through. If it's not a failure grade, we don't make them retake it. When I can tell you I've had multiple parents come up to me and say, my child took it in 7th grade and they're not ready to go on geometry. I want them to take it again. And we don't allow them because of what we call course progression. And I think that's where the struggle is, not just by giving advanced classes to younger students, but by creating this pathway that we expect all these students to fit into. Because we do have some that maybe excel really well and could handle 7 AP classes if that's what they choose to do. But the pressure we put on them to do it, I think, is too high at this stake. When I look back at it, I took them because it was a subject that I liked and I wanted to take a higher level course. But in reality, I think all it's doing is watering down our degrees. Because how many of our jobs now do you have to have a master's that you didn't have to in the years past? And not just education in general, but the expectation is we quote unquote think all students are going to go to college, which means that to be that higher level, you now have to get a master's or you now have to go higher because kids are getting college degrees, AAs or whatnot in high school. And so it's just this horrible progression that is continuing on.
And it's, obviously I don't know that, we're going to fix this problem, the two of us sitting over my kitchen table, but the problem just keeps getting pushed forward. In my eyes, it started with AP courses in high school. And it's like, oh, that's cool, a chance for certain students to excel. Then it became, oh, it's available to make things fair, it has to be available to everyone. And then we made it available to everyone. Once we made it available to everyone, they said, well, let's incentivize the school to offer it, so we'll give the school bonuses and teachers bonuses and for all the kids who take and pass AP. But then it just gets pushed down because in order to take college-level courses in high school, you need to take high school-level courses in middle school, and it actually goes all the way down to kindergarten, where they are doing stuff in kindergarten I just don't think they should be doing. I look at some of the stuff my son is doing in preschool, and I don't think I was doing that in preschool. Before we started recording, he was down here and making thank you cards for his teachers for Teacher Appreciation Week. And I love the fact that he can write and spell things, and I love the logical processes I see going on in his brain, but I wonder if he should be doing that at his age now.
Right. And I think in the long run, again, it goes back to we're pushing them so fast. Some students can do it in preschool, and that's great. But how much time and effort are we forcing the whole class to spend on this one thing that not every kid's ready for? Where, kindergarten used to be a nap and playground, and then you worked on shapes and writing. And now I have friends that teach kindergarten, and they barely get playground time. I mean, it's something that, a 5 and 6 year old can't function by sitting in a classroom for 7 hours the way that an adult can, which still makes us go crazy. So the expectation of a 5 and 6 year old or 7 and 8 year old even trying to sit still and do these things that in reality, in the long run, their brain is just not ready for majority of students. Now, there are some that excel, but we have options for them. We have gifted, we have honors in elementary and middle where those students can be working on excelling on that way versus pushing the whole class to do something that, I always go back to this. Common Core is not something that I absolutely hate. I think it's implemented in a wrong way. But the positive about Common Core is it does give you all these options on how to do one simple task that not everybody can do in the same format or test. But the way I see it is going, instead of teaching the whole class 4 options at one time, is teach them the one way that works and then assist the students who need additional assistance or excel the students who can teach the one group that needs assistance versus taking the whole class and teaching them 5 ways, which I think is what we've done is we've taken this expectation that either every child needs assistance or every child is going to excel in one way, shape, or the other. And we've put it on a large group of people instead of individualizing something. And I will never forget when I got hired for this position, one of the things that my, board certified, administrator said to me was basically, don't ever forget there's a person behind that number. And I think that always has stuck with me, whether in this position or as a teacher. We do work for AP incentives or we do work for all these things because, face it, as a teacher, money incentivizes us. But at the same time, where did we forget that those 30 kids that used to be in AP Bio because you applied and you had test scores and you had these things that required you to be there because you really wanted to be, did it turn into you now have 120 and only 20 of those kids are actually going to do well in that class?
I think we can agree that acceleration is definitely a problem. However, I'm curious about something, and I didn't prepare you for this at all, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Do you feel like your thought processes or ideas or any of that have changed as a result of moving into the administrator role? Either looking back to when you were in support position or now as an AP, but getting out of your quote-unquote 4 walls as a teacher and seeing the other side of things. Has that changed your thought processes?
So when I taught in the classroom, not in instructional support, but it actually goes hand in hand, I taught what we would call in the educational world the bottom 20%. So I taught the students who were struggling in reading and math. Many of them couldn't read at even a high school level, and I was teaching high school. So I had already taught these students who felt like they weren't good enough to meet all these requirements, and yet we're pushing them to do things that they can't do. And in reality, they needed to go back to 3rd grade reading before they could feel successful in any other subject area in high school. And so, no, I think from my perspective, I've been working with students that have felt these pressures for so long that I have kind of taken them on myself and seen where it's changed. I will say that from the high school level to the middle school level, my eyes were very open in that aspect. I knew in high school we were pushing students to do things. I knew that we were enrolling them in AP and explaining to them an expectation that wasn't, I don't think, there. From the college level, as Brad said, I really don't think that if you don't take 6 AP classes your senior year, you're not going to get into college. But these expectations that we put on the students for them to think that, I didn't realize, I guess, how much we're pushing that even down into middle school I talked to my sister. She teaches elementary. I think she has a small perspective of that. But at the same time, I think middle school is where all I see are hormones and drama and struggling. And we're taking something that these kids can barely function through the hardest 3 years and then asking them to also take high school level courses that they're stressing out over. And so did it change totally from being in the classroom? No, but I think it actually may have just opened my eyes even more to see how much we did it versus the small percentage of students I saw it happening to when I was in the classroom.
Generally speaking, I would say my transition into a support position definitely opened my eyes. I saw things very differently, very quickly as a result of that transition. Ultimately, I think a lot of those things are exactly what you said. I saw a microcosm with my 125 students a year versus seeing every kid at our school all at once and every teacher all at once and looking at the bigger picture, if you think of it that way. So I definitely second that sentiment as well. Let's go to my second question. And my second question is, what is something you're doing, or if you want to pull from the past, you can. What is something you used to do in a classroom or are doing now that you think other teachers should do?
I think the biggest thing, and again, this probably goes back to the type of students I was teaching, but in reality, it really goes into all of them, is for me, I made a choice in the classroom. I never had it be that I need you to show me this benchmark and this standard in mastery, and you're only going to do it one way. You're going to write 3 sentences and explain yourself, or you're going to answer 5 multiple choice questions. My big thing in my classroom is we all have very different learning styles. Every single person. And for me, I wanted to make my classroom be that way. So my classroom was a lot of station work and a lot of options. And I would give what I'm most, I guess, known for in my department, because I would share it with everybody, was a bingo sheet. And horizontally, it was a standard or a benchmark they had to meet. And then vertically, it was 3 options of how they can show me that. And a lot of kids are artists and they can show me something by drawing out the scene, or vocabulary and words are really their thing and they could write a journal entry with using the vocabulary that was necessary. Whatever the standard may have been at the time, but I would give them choices. And I think that that is something that really ignites a student's education and ignites their joy and passion for it, because they're getting to show me something that they really do understand, but in a way that they really actually enjoy doing it as well. It's not just, well, you told me I had to write 2 sentences, so here they are. It's, I got to tell a whole story in the way that I thought it happened using all the vocabulary correctly, or whatever it might have been. And I think and it may be easier to do this in social studies, which is what I taught, but I know that that's something when I go into classrooms, I really encourage teachers to do, and I really work with them on, is not every child's the same. You may have one enrichment station because they nailed this benchmark and these 4 kids are going to go on and add to the story or add to the theories or whatever it may have been. Whereas then you have the opportunity in stations to work with those 3 or 4 that didn't master it. And now you can reteach something to them and make them feel better about it instead of moving on to where they feel like they're being left behind at every unit because they're still missing something or still confused in something. So I guess in the educational terms, this would be called individualization of learning. But I think it's just what it looks like in each teacher's classroom that really worked for them. So that's something that I worked hard at doing in my classroom and tried to help and assist others. And a lot of it was also just the real world application of it. If I am learning, Algebra 1 and I have no use for it, or if I'm learning social studies in, old America, what's really the reality for me? And that's what those stations allowed them to do, is apply it for themselves.
So you did like an individualized rotation. Well, I'm trying to imagine this. So in a bingo card, I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't actually like a 5x5 grid at this point. You said like maybe however many standards you had, and then for each standard you had 3 options.
Correct.
So a lot of front loading for you.
Absolutely.
Because you're now developing 3 versions of every standard. How much of... Man, that's just so cool. I'm just like thinking about all the implications of this, and I'm just like, cool. Okay, so how much... Once you got in the swing of it, once you were doing it a couple times, was it still constantly a boatload of work? Or is it one of those things that it seems like a lot of work, and it is at first, But then you get used to it.
I think the hardest part for me is that I was teaching on mastery. So it wasn't as though you're getting 3 out of 5 points because you used 3 out of the 5 vocabulary words. The thing for me was mastery. So how can you prove to me that you know and understand that standard or benchmark? And so the part that took a lot for me was creating like an idea of a rubric, basically, that was also across the board for whatever standard I'm teaching. So how can you show me that you mastered this? By drawing it, by writing a news journal, but also doing it. Like, it was giving me the work of doing the rubrics and stuff, which also, but in the long run, made grading way easier. So I think it depends on how you view it. I taught 7 periods, and we got out of school at 2:01, and I was there till 4 or 5 on majority of days and working on grading and or making these lessons. Once I got my department on board a little bit more, which is something that I think as an overall area, we're working on getting teachers to work together more, because why are we reinventing the wheel? So once we started working together and having a PLC, professional learning community, we were able to share more ideas. And that took a lot of the weight off of myself or the teachers who didn't want to do all the work, because we were able to really collaborate and really make these work for each unit versus me doing all of the work trying to create 9 to 12 activities for every single unit that matched the standards or benchmark. So I think working together creates it. But yes, it was a lot of work, and the only reason I think I kept going is because I could see the students. Most students don't like social studies. They don't care what the history is. They want to know what the future is. And so to teach them something that allowed them to apply it, but also to understand it, I think made me work that hard, if not harder, because I was able to see light bulbs going off on students that at the beginning of the year really, really struggled through just reading the basic passages.
That's cool. Now, were your anecdotal observations echoed in data?
Yes.
So comparatively to like the rest of your department and people doing similar or different activities?
Yes. So essentially, so we had an end-of-course exam my last 2 years in the subject I was teaching, and my data was, I would say, it's expected to be lower than the teachers, because I was basically the only teacher that had what we consider regular. But at the same time, my pre-test to post-test data was raised by 40 to 50%, and I still met the average of the state on the EOC for students who were expected not to pass a class, basically. So can I give you specific percentages? No, but I can tell you that it worked for this type of student I was teaching. And that may not be something that works for high-level thinkers, but for something that is lower level, I had a far higher than expected pass rate, I guess I should say. And it really worked. Even students who didn't necessarily overall pass a class, they were able to retain information better than recall information, which is what a lot of activities do in classrooms right now. They're not asking students to apply and asking them to really dig to where they understand something and then can remember it later. It's just recall. And I think that's the biggest difference by you doing these type of activities.
And that was going to be my next point is you, even in your description, you talk about hitting the standard. You talk about specifically, and this is probably, in my opinion, what I would guess made it so successful, is your rubrics were designed to ensure that the level of the standard, and then they are reaching the level of the standard. And not to make sure you had 3 activities that got the same information. And it's important paradigm in my mind to consider. So many of our teachers are like, well, I'll differentiate. I'll give 3 different versions of this same assignment.
Right. And then 9 times out of 10, when you're doing it that way and 3 versions of one assignment, you're lowering the expectation or the rigor of one assignment and you're raising the other one. So you're essentially lowering the rigor for students that you don't think are going to do very well and raising it for the students who need enrichment, which is not how a standard is created. A standard is created as a mastery level of 1 point. And to get them to that point, how are you going to teach them to apply at that rigor? And then if you do have a group of students who are a little bit lower, how can I get them to show me something without it just being 5 multiple choice questions? How can I get them to show me that they can apply this knowledge, whether it be a double bubble map or drawing whatever I'm asking the ending of World War II, whatever it was allowing them to still show me and explain their knowledge And yes, I still gave end of course exams. Yes, I still had to give benchmark tests, but they were all still based on mastery. So 5 questions for every standard. Can you show me in 3 out of 5 questions that you're at least applying and mastering a standard? And if not, then you're going to retake that one because we're going to get you to mastery. And that is how I ran my classroom.
In a lot of ways, that's the vision of what a classroom is supposed to be. And so many teachers look at it as, oh, that seems like so much work and so much effort. And I'm curious because I feel like I don't feel like I have this complaint, but I feel like one of the complaints that I would hear people come up with as a result of this is, what does grading look like with that?
It's difficult. It wasn't easy, but by creating a rubric, it was, and I can't think of a standard in front of my face right now, but if it was the causes and effects of World War I, I know that's one of them, then they have to be able to explain what the causes were and the effects were and not just check mark them off a box. It was, this is one of the causes because, and explain it. So in your rubric, you're including those types of things. You're including list 3 causes, and that might be a level 1, pass rate, but explain them would be the level 3 or whatever levels you choose. I used 3s. So I used 1, 2, and 3. You either are still beginning, you kind of got it, but you didn't apply it, or you got it and you applied it. And I think that's where you have to take, and again, the work comes in where you're breaking down every standard to what their level of expectation is. And not just, can they tell me an effect of World War I? But they have to be able to explain it and tell me why or what comes next or whatever really at each standard level was able to break it down enough to understand. Do they understand all the steps that got them there? Or can they just recall something that they were taught eventually or at some point?
Do you, I feel like I have to ask this, maybe you don't, but do you have any of these bingo cards and rubrics available still that I could maybe share with my audience so that they can get a visual for what we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll have to find them. I don't have them right now, but I'll give them to you. Yes, I do have some, and I've shared them as best that I can with people, and I think it's just something that a personal opinion is that mastery level is how we should all be teaching, especially once we get to the high school level, and that is a full transitional shift at any school to do it that way. And I was at a school that did move that. All 4 core subjects were at mastery level. So you either made the 80% and you mastered each standard given to you, or you retook it and reapplied until you got there. And it didn't mean we changed all the grades, don't get me wrong, but that was the expectation. And by doing that, it creates an environment where, yes, it's a lot of work, but how am I going to get my student there? And I wouldn't say faster, but more applicable to them, but also to where I can see what they're doing. I think that's the biggest thing that is difficult for teachers who are trying to move in that way. If you've only got one teacher out of a group of 5 that believes that way, but yet we're common planning, it makes it very difficult to incorporate that belief system on everybody, even though you have 1 or 2 who are really interested in it.
I'm guessing that you would need at least local administrator support to go to something like this. Often I talk about on the podcast that one of my measures of success would be to get at least one person to go rogue for student benefit. To just be like, I don't care what the district says or what my principal says. I'm going to do this because it's good for students. But I think this might be a case where you need a little bit of support, at least at the school level, to say, okay, you can try that.
Well, and the biggest thing that goes back to this, and this is the huge fight, and that I totally pushed against for about 9 weeks of my first year, we moved high school. Now, this is high school again, but we moved high school courses that when you're in honors, your test and or assessments, because an assessment does not have to be a given test. It can be an exit quiz or certain, whatever we're viewing as an assessment. Assessments and tests and quizzes counted as 90% of your grade. And homeworks or classwork was only 10%, because in reality, my classwork is only to get you to that assessment at the end. It's not how much can you copy of the friend next to you. And that is a total mindset shift that has to happen at those levels, high school and middle school. And middle school doesn't have to be 90-10. It can be something like 60-40 or 70-30, but just enough to where students understand that I'm practicing for application and knowledge at the end. I'm not just practicing to make people happy and get an A right now, because that's not going to be anything. And that's where I think the whole mastery concept comes in, is to really understand that you're mastering a standard or a benchmark versus just having the students learn it to move forward.
Why is that a fight? I mean, if we have a set of standards, Common Core or variation thereon, like our state has Florida State Standards, which is basically Common Core plus cursive. I mean, it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. We added cursive in elementary school, but we didn't take anything out. So we're Common Core plus cursive, and that's Florida State Standards. But if that's where we're at, if we have a set of standards that are designed to be measured on mastery, why is it a fight to get staff, students, parents, administration, districts on board with a 90-10 grade split?
Two things.
Or 80-20 or whatever.
Yeah, two things. They're going to realize that their child really doesn't know something and they really have to do work and study to get there. And not many parents are willing to realize that it's not that my child has an A because they finish your coloring page. It's my child has an A because they understand it. And an A is hard to reach because A means you mastered everything plus some. C is what we consider average. C is standard benchmark. Like, we should have more students getting C's and B's if we have an expectation that this is the rubric that we're following with grades. And that's what pushes back on teachers. Teachers don't want to fight parents on their grades. Teachers don't want to have to say to a parent, your child has an F because they failed every assessment. Because what it turns back into is, well, how'd they do on their assignments? Well, they didn't turn any in. Well, then how do you know? Well, because if they didn't do those assignments, I can't grade them. But assignments are preparation for an assessment, whether that assessment's a project, which I did a lot of, because you can still show me if you know something by applying it versus answering 5 questions on a sheet of paper. But at the same time, either way, you're now having to explain to a parent that your child isn't necessarily all A material. And I think we've created a society that A is the expectation of children versus the hard work and pushing your child to be that better person or better student per se, not necessarily person, but a better student by getting there. And I think that is where the shock comes in for a lot of students who get to college, because college is not based on that. College is based on bell curve and average students. And when you go from, and I was one of those students. I went from all A's in high school to getting to college and barely pushing through with C's and B's at times because I didn't push myself, because I didn't think that I had to study that way, because I didn't study like that in high school. So why does it matter? So I think it's a push between a culture shift with parents, but also with teachers to not, and I hesitate to say it this way, but to basically give grades a lot of times. There's a lot of push of very ridiculous assignments that we give grades for because we don't want to face that parent who the child has an 89.3 and they deserve an A. And so we give them that extra credit assignment at the end of the 9 weeks. And I think that is a culture shift in the area that we are in and the expectation of the area that we teach in, because that's how it's been. And we have a lot of teachers that are still on that mindset, whether the newer teachers have come in with those viewpoints of mastery, they're still pushed by a greater culture of the school that they're in or the area that they're in, which I've personally dealt with much more at the school that I'm at now. But at the same time, I can see the teacher's perspective of not wanting to go back against and have more parent conferences. But yet I can't prove to them that your child has an A, but they didn't pass the OC, because that doesn't correlate. That makes absolutely no sense. Your child should have an A because they know the material. And I think that's where we have to start, I think, with the belief system.
I see so many problems. I get your view, and I agree with you on your view, right? I agree, mm-hmm. We should be measuring our mastery, and regularly I argue grading is flawed. Mm-hmm. Grading is a mess. But I can see where it's a mess on either end. I look at my grade distribution in my courses when I taught English, and we're always pretty much an inverted bell curve. They were pretty much always F's and B's and A's. I had very few C's and D's. And the reason for that is because if you're trying, you could bomb the test and still do the work and be okay. And that doesn't really make sense, but it's the only way that I felt like as a classroom teacher, my grades kept falling that way, whether I wanted them to or not. So I wonder if, I'm very much wondering where the chicken and the egg are, is the way I'm going to put this. Because is it the grading system that is flawed? Is it the instructional planning that's flawed? Is it the mindset of parents? Is it the mindset of students? Is it the administrative perspective or the district standpoint? Where is the source? What is the first thing? What do we fix first, or what broke first?
Well, I can tell you from the school that I was at, my first 9 weeks grades, I had a heart attack because it literally was, if I'm taking it out of person, I can't think off the top of my head, but say I had 100 students, I had 2 A's and maybe 3 B's and the rest were C's, D's, and F's. And that was a huge, we had parent conferences every day. Parents were flipping out. But once they realized that, hey, your child is not studying and your child is not trying, all they're doing is copying their friend's paper, which means that they're not getting the information. They don't understand it because they're not doing it. Once the teacher explains it properly, I think that true assessment is their application knowledge, not just, can you tell me the 5 vocab words? And that those 5 vocab words were also just copied from their neighbor. It was really a shift at the school level. Now, granted, I had full administrative support. Full. They were the ones that pushed it out, including with the parents. I will tell you that 80% of the staff pushed back, and they were very angry, and after the first 9 weeks, they fought it. But that is a district mentality, because that's the expectation that I get incentives and my students pass courses. So I think it's kind of a side-by-side, because the district supported our decision to go mastery, and they wanted us to be that way. But at the same time, there's this in the back of your head as a teacher, these incentives that keep getting pushed out that do not mean my students understand anything, but yet I at least have a good bell curve, or I have more A's and B's, or whatever the mindset is. I had a mindset that as a teacher, my job was to ensure that my students learned the material, but also learned life application and go from there. And if that meant a kid had a C, the kid had the C, because that's maybe all that they understood. Or if they wanted to work harder, they would work harder and get the B. But I think that it's a cultural change that has to start with a local admin. It's got to start with your school, because if your admin doesn't support your decision, then they're not going to back you when that parent comes in and complains about it. It has to start there. I don't think as a district that we disagree with mastery. I think that it just hasn't become a large enough issue yet to implicate a change across the board. I think they're leaving it at the school-based level. But as a teacher, I could see the benefits, the test scores, the overall graduation rate. Everything was fully impacted the year that we switched to mastery level. So I think there's enough evidence of it if we had enough support of it in each area. And like I said, it was something, generally I think we start things off in elementary, and I don't think that's the place to do it. I think generally at this type of thing, you need to do it at high school level and go backwards, which sounds weird because you want kids to understand it early on, but you don't want kids to be totally, deflated by not getting something when they're in kindergarten and first grade. A lot of those, kids at that age really need encouragement of, I got the star, or I got the E, or whatever scale we're using now, and working them towards it. But that's the argument too, is charter schools with a lot of success. And I'm not a huge charter proponent, but they do portfolio systems from kindergarten to 5th grade, which is a proof of mastery of each benchmark based on student assessments and or assignments. So there's argument for that side of it, that starting it there and allowing these kids to realize that I have to prove what I know, not just answer some questions on a test. And I think that was a roundabout way of answering your question.
Still, I think we get that. I think your point is that you could affect the change with just school level support.
Correct.
District would have at least to say, yeah, that seems okay.
Right.
But as long as school administration was on board, you can at least begin to push in that direction.
Absolutely.
And that would be, I think, what we'd all like to see is a push for a direction of change. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't all agree which direction we need to push, but I think we can all agree we need to push for a direction of change.
Absolutely.
Let's get to my last question, and we'll talk with this one. And I always love this question. Who is the best teacher you ever had, or what is the teacher that had the biggest impact on you?
So the teacher that had the biggest impact on me was and I really, really, really get torn between 2 teachers, because one, I love this subject area, and I think that creates a love for all things within the classroom, in that classroom, but I also think she was really great. And then the other class was one that I really didn't like, but the teacher made it to be where you really wanted to be there and wanted to be there for the classwork and the discussion. So I'm torn because I think that for me, I was driven in academics. I liked academics anyways. There wasn't much you had to do to push me to enjoy school. But as a classroom teacher, I think I would have to go with Her name is Jen Carras, and we're actually really good friends today. And she's one of the main reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing. But she started teaching high school at the similar age that I did, right out of college, came down and started teaching government and social studies, economics, and that was my dream. I took 4 government classes in high school alone. And so I think for me, that was something I really enjoyed. But she also did exactly that. We used interactive notebooks at the time, which was the big thing when I was in high school, which I did when I was with my 9th and 10th graders, because I think it works for organizational skills. But we did that, and a lot of it was application, and it wasn't just glue this worksheet into this folder. We had a lot of journaling, avid strategies where we would journal and talk about what we just learned about. And I think that for me, that ignited that love and passion of learning, not just school per se. And looking back, I wanted to have a classroom that was like hers. Because it was a class that actually was AP that students were forced to take. And I will never forget, the class clown sitting in that class and her trying to redirect him to a college level material course that he had no interest in. And yet she was able to do it in a way that showed passion and learning for, all those things. And I think that is what made me be the teacher that I am, is I have a passion for the students to learn something, and I will work however I need to get there. And I think that's what she did, is she would take classes and learn and did anything that she could to make sure that she knew the knowledge, but also that we were learning it at the same time. And what if that meant do a funky skit because that is how we understood something, or have a really fun 1920s jazz party because that's the time era that we were learning it. That was the things that she worked for to get us there. And I think that's why I work so hard to be that way for my students.
I love how your story has a very direct kind of, this teacher had this impact on me, and I pushed that impact forward onto a whole new generation of kids as a result of where you ended up there. And I love that part of your story.
A lot of us as educators, we kind of hope for that, right? Right. We hope for that lasting impression on our students, where we want to see that we had an impact. And as a kid, I always said that, it's really great to know a guy. Like, I want to know a guy that can do, like, somebody's like, oh, I need my car fixed. Oh, I know a guy. I know a guy like that. But I think it's even better to be the guy that people know. Like, I want to be that. And I think in teaching, it's all of us have a teacher that impacted us. Well, most of us have a teacher that impacted us pretty heavily. But I think it'd be even better if it would make my day to know that I was the teacher that impacted somebody else in a profound way. And
I think my biggest thing in teaching, I don't care if you knew when the Civil War started, ended, or who was president. Because the only time, in true reality, that recall knowledge, the only time that matters is if you're playing trivia. Those types of things don't. But if you can apply the knowledge that I gave you and use it in your real world, then I know that I did something. Because I knew that a lot of my students weren't going to go to college. I knew it. They didn't want it. They had no interest in it. But how can I make this application of causes and effects something that they can use when they're, in a business world, or when they're a paralegal, or when there's things that, were reachable for them that they wanted and they had. It was, you can argue all you want that you don't need to read that manual, or that let's go backwards. You don't need to read the article because you can answer the questions. But in reality, when you're in an office room, can you continue doing what you're doing without reading the manual and applying that knowledge? It was a lot of classroom back and forth of real life this to that, because I think that is one of the things we're missing today, is that we're pushing, and not that I don't agree with standards and benchmarks, but we're pushing standards and benchmarks when we're missing the real life application of a lot of opportunities that we could to really impact students' lives in the long term, and not just passing an EOC. We hit a lot in what was basically the same 3 questions. Like, we really hit those 3 questions and dove into them, but I think we covered a lot of ground. I like this student-centered perspective you take on teaching.
I don't know that we've ever really talked about that much to the children. We've been working together for 2 years and good friends and hang out all the time, but I don't know if we've ever really talked about that. So that's cool. To have a very student-centered perspective on individualized learning. And I love the bingo card idea. You're going to have to send me those so I can put those in the show notes if you want to see this stuff. Because I think it's, once you get the visual for some people, like I'm just like, that's so cool. I want to do that with my kids now. I have students actually. I don't know why I would make them do that, but I'm just going to make them do it because it'd be fun. Mutters, thank you for sitting with me and talking with me. We're like at almost an hour already.
Wow. Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll have you again in the future if I ever come up with more than 3 questions for my guests. So, because now you've already answered this. So, but yeah, thanks for sitting with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again, Nicole, for sitting with me. I loved that episode. I loved recording that. That was a lot of fun. And thank you all for listening if you've made it this far. I really appreciate all the support I'm getting so far with the Planning Period podcast. I set out to make a show that was just a couple of people talking about education because I love doing that so much. And getting the feedback and the comments and everything else from people that I've gotten so far has been awesome. If you would also like to be one of those people to give feedback, please write a review on iTunes, subscribe on iTunes. Help me out there. I would like to see this podcast get a little more attention on iTunes. That would be awesome. But also reach out to me on Twitter. Reach out to me on my Facebook page, Brad Streffler, Twitter at Brad Streffler. All those things are available on the show notes if you need links to those. And let me know what you're thinking of the show so far. I'd really appreciate it. As always, thank you to Kevin MacLeod for our music that we use here, and that is Vicious by Kevin MacLeod, used under Creative Commons. And I will see you all next week. Have a great one.